All this as a new national poll showing a dead heat. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith. Here today, Harris Faulkner, host of Kennedy on Fox Business, Kennedy, also from FBN, co-host of After the Bell, Melissa Francis, and today's hashtag One Lucky Guy. We have a Fox Business trifecta today. The host of Lou Dobbs tonight. Lou Dobbs himself is here, and he is outnumbered.
Actually, you're
Harris
not.
is outnumbered.
I'm outnumbered. You guys are all from Fox Business. But you know
You
what?
just took the pressure off.
I'm
Thanks
giving
so
it
much.
right back to you, my friend.
No.
That outnumberedness.
I love it.
Welcome. I
Good
haven't
to
seen you
have
in a
you.
while.
Good to see
How you
you.
feeling this final stretch?
I love it. You know, you're talking about 2 weeks to go in this thing. It seems like we've been sort of dreading the pace of this thing for so long.
Yeah.
And now suddenly I'm dreading the prospect that it might be over.
You are?
Somewhat. But I'm ready.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we're ready for you. Let's get started. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton looking to build support in Florida again today, a day after early in-person voting began in the Sunshine State. This is an independent daily tracking survey billed as the nation's most accurate, shows the candidates locked in a virtual tie, even as other polls show Hillary leading the presidential race. The Investor's Business Daily poll shows Trump and Clinton neck and neck, with Hillary leading 42 to 41% in a four-way race. But a new CNN poll finds the Democratic nominee leading by 5 points nationally, 49 to 44%. All this as Donald Trump continues to denounce most of the polls as phony, while declaring that he's actually winning.
The system is corrupt, folks, and I've been saying it, it's rigged. I've been saying it for a long time. The system is rigged. WikiLeaks also shows how John Podesta rigged the polls by oversampling Democrats, a voter suppression technique. And that's happening to me all the time. It's called voter suppression because people will say, oh, gee, Trump's out. Folks, we're winning. We're winning. We're winning.
He really keeps hammering on this point, Lou, that the polls are wrong and that he's actually winning.
And it's not an accident, as you know, that he is doing that, because this resonates with his base, it resonates with independents, because everyone knows these polls aren't making a lot of sense. You've got some outliers at 12-point differentials and others with him in the lead. National tracking polls, specifically IBD and the LA Times USC polls.
But his critics are quick to point out that when this race started, and especially in the primary season, he was quick to point out those polls when they showed that he was winning.
You know, quick is an interesting word to use, because remember, it took a long time for him to plow through the national liberal media attacking him as not being serious, not being able to get even to the primaries. And the next thing you know, it was February 1st, and he had a little setback in Iowa. And the next thing you know, he starts, the Trump train, as they call it, starts rolling. So there's been, I know what you mean by quick, but this thing was a process that he had to overcome national media bias every step of the way, and has done so.
It is tough to determine. And for the average voter to look at these polls and determine, well, which ones do you pay attention to and which ones are telling us what's going on?
So I'm wondering if they're paying that much attention anymore. I mean, remember when we were on the ground at the conventions and you would talk with people, particularly obviously the RNC in Cleveland about this, people were really resisting the notion of taking them. Like, they didn't really want to take part. They're going to keep it close to the vest. So I've often wondered all along how accurate they've been, knowing that people either are not going to be forthright because they don't want to start that conversation with anybody, or they're just going to avoid the process altogether.
What's interesting here with the IBD poll specifically is, you know, we talk a lot about whether these polls are skewed based on how many landlines are used, what is the methodology, and with IBD they actually use more cell phones than landlines, 65 to 35%. And you also have to remember, in all of these polls, Trump is still up with independents. And you also have to note that independents make up more of the electorate than Democrats or Republicans. 34% independents, 33% Democrats, 29% Republicans.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So you look at all the polls all together, and he's lagging, obviously. But at the same time, he comes out and he says these are rigged. Everybody sort of laughs at him. But you go back to when he said, and we're going to get to the story later in the show, so I don't want to undercut it, but this idea that when he said the violence was being incited at his rallies by Hillary Clinton's team, and people lashed out at him and said, you know, what a thing to say, you know, to point the finger like that. You have no evidence. Lo and behold, here we come down the line. online, and we're seeing evidence. So he says these things that people mark as crazy, and then later the evidence trickles out. I don't know.
Can I say, people aren't doing that. The national liberal media is doing that. And it's a really important distinction because they're not speaking for the people. Donald Trump and presumably Hillary Clinton are speaking for the people, but not the national liberal media.
Lou, because you're the king of business and you're on the couch with us today, is the comparison to Brexit and that surprise turnout of that vote, is that a fair comparison to what Donald Trump is pretty much setting up that we may see?
I think it's a fair comparison if you're pulling for Donald Trump and you want that last-minute flip in the numbers. Beyond that, you're talking about a nation, a much smaller nation with a very different issue. This is the most hotly contested presidential campaign, and I know some people say, well, 2000 was a pretty contested in 1980, but this is the most vicious, dirty. I mean, this is a brawl. And
well, what it is right now is tight in a lot of those polls. I'm curious to know the difference in strategy for Kellyanne Conway and the campaign manager who says, yes, we are behind in the polls, and for Donald Trump, who for a second in a tweet said yes and then went back on the stump and said, no, we're winning, winning, winning.
Well, I think Kellyanne and Donald Trump both understand very clearly. You have to emulate the Democrats in two respects. One is you can't have any more of this internecine warfare that's been going on. And secondly, you don't give up an inch. You don't concede a damn thing, because the Democrats never do, and that's why they often prevail, and most recently in these last two cycles prevailed, because they never allow for a fracture in the party.
Interesting. Well, talk to Bernie Sanders about that. We'll move on. As Donald Trump stumps hard ahead of Election Day, he insists there is a path to the 270 electoral votes needed to win the White House, despite what some critics and analysts are saying. Here he is a short time ago talking about the states he needs to lock down.
I think I'm winning in Florida, which I have to win. I think I'm winning in North Carolina from what I hear. I'm polling very well in Ohio. In fact, I'm going to win Ohio. We're doing phenomenally well in Iowa. I think we're either winning or tied. It's going to be very, very close.
Meanwhile, Vice Presidential nominee Mike Pence has a message for wary Republicans.
It's time for Republicans to come home. We've got support from independents. We've got support from many Democrats. But as you've said many times, Sean, it's time for Republicans to come home and come together, elect Donald Trump.
So piggybacking off of what Lou just said is this idea that emulate, if you will, the Democrats. And that's what their message is right now. You got to come home.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, the right to get out there and give that message, it's a little late. We wish they could stay on message throughout the whole campaign. Better late than never. But there's still 2 weeks left, and we know how things can move. I'm looking at the early returns in Florida. We don't know how people voted, but we know how many people voted by mail. Republicans have returned 31,000 more ballots so far than Democrats have. And it kind of speaks to that whole thing, like you said, about people not wanting to say who they're voting for.
And to intensity, perhaps. Maybe that gives us a little clue about intensity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Tim Kaine had 30 people show up at West Palm Beach for an event yesterday. 30 people.
Wow, that's
almost
fabulous,
3 dozen.
Yes.
But I heard the weather was good for surfing. I don't know.
It might have been that, but then you had 15,000 show up in Tampa, where the surfing apparently wasn't so good for Donald Trump.
There you go. I want to talk about a little place, Maine's 2nd Congressional District, just one electoral vote in that rural northern part of the state. And Trump and Clinton are going after it. And what that tells us, because it was leaning GOP, now it's a toss-up. How much does that matter?
Well, I don't know. Explain the strategy here, because, the Democrats seem to be downplaying how well they're doing compared to the Trump campaign right now. Why are you seeing Donald Trump not saying, look, we do have a lot of ground to make up. We are not where we want to be. We heard that from Kellyanne Conway. I mean, wouldn't that help get voters out if they knew that, the race is tight, but we're not where we need to be?
I think that what you're saying is exactly correct. But there is so much anger, there is so much cold anger, as some wags have expressed it, within the Republican base. They don't have to say much. They're going to be out there. People were in a line, I mentioned in Tampa, for 12 hours.
Yeah.
And you're seeing this across the country. This isn't differentiated by anything other than the bluest of blue states. you're seeing it everywhere else.
I mean, but that's what's going to make election night so interesting, because so much conventional wisdom has been so wrong and so far off base
Throughout
in
the
this
campaign.
election cycle, throughout the whole thing. And people who were prognosticating and predicting, they were dead wrong in the primary. And, you know, we're still seeing a very tight race. Now, granted, Donald Trump isn't up in any of these polls, but two, Rasmussen and LA Times.
The national polls.
Yeah.
So, Kennedy, let me ask you this, though. And we can put up the electoral scoreboard as we see it here at Fox. If, excuse me, this is the Trump campaign prediction map.
Yeah.
Forgive me there. All right, so we
These
want to make that
results
very
just
clear. And you see that Texas is obviously not in play on their map. But what I was going to say, and it is when you look kind of a trajectory process, our map shows that Texas and other places are not in play. So what is he seeing that's different on the ground? Because he has been on the ground, and he's getting, as Lou said, those huge rallies. So he's talking to people.
No, he is. But, you know, again, what makes it interesting is states that have been traditionally Democrat or Republican are now either pink or the lightest of blue. And that means election night, they really could fall either way, because Texas and Georgia now very much in play where they weren't before. And, you know, what does that mean exactly? We don't know. And frankly, if I were in a state that had early voting, I wouldn't be voting 2 weeks out, because I still want to see what's going to happen if the Clinton campaign really has more surprises and more grovelets. And Giuliani is promising from the Trump campaign that they've got more surprises. I want to see how everything coalesces and falls into place.
U.S. Supreme Court picks are what people tell me time and time again on both sides of the political aisle, which are irrespective of any sort of late October surprise or anything like that. And I'm fascinated by those low numbers of people who say that they haven't made up their minds yet, which is why they're willing to vote early.
The low numbers or the high numbers?
The lower numbers that we've been seeing recently.
Yeah, I'm surprised there's anyone out there, though, at this point who isn't undecided. As I've said, I'm going as the undecided voter on Halloween because I'm not sure they really exist except on that night. We've had so much out there. You got to know who you're voting for at this point, no?
All right. We're going to move on.
But
we'll come back to all of that. Don't look sad, Lou.
Disappointed is all.
Don't be. We're going to talk more. Years after President Obama promised Americans our health care costs would go down. Oh, you're going to chew on that for us, Lou. The White House is announcing Obamacare premiums will soon skyrocket by double digits. So what is the impact 2 weeks out from Election Day? A lot of people picking their enrollments right now, right? This is the time of year. And outrage building after thousands of our nation's heroes are ordered to repay their enlistment bonuses. Sandra, this is one of the most clicked on things yesterday that we talked about. A decade after going to war, the government wants that money back. And there's a problem, though. What is it? How on earth did all this happen in the first place? And after the TV version of us wraps up, you can chat with us online.
Accurate shows the candidates locked in a virtual tie, even as other polls show Hillary leading the presidential race. The Investor's Business Daily poll shows Trump and Clinton neck and neck, with Hillary leading 42 to 41% in a four-way race. But a new CNN poll finds the Democratic nominee leading by 5 points nationally, 49 to 40. All this as a new national poll showing a dead heat. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith. Here today, Harris Faulkner, host of Kennedy on Fox Business, Kennedy. Also from FBN, co-host of After the Bell, Melissa Francis. And today's hashtag One Lucky Guy. We have a Fox Business trifecta today. The host of Lou Dobbs tonight. Lou Dobbs himself is here. 4%. All this as Donald Trump continues to denounce most of the polls as phony, while declaring that he's actually winning.
The system is corrupt, folks, and I've been saying it, it's rigged. I've been saying it for a long time. The system is rigged. WikiLeaks also shows how John Podesta rigged the polls.
And he is outnumbered.
Actually, you're
Harris
not.
is outnumbered.
I'm outnumbered. You guys are off in Fox Business. But you know
just
what?
took the pressure off.
I'm
Thanks
giving
so
it
much.
right back to you, my friend.
No.
That outnumberedness.
I love it.
Welcome. I haven't
to
seen you
have
in a
you.
while.
Good to see
How
you.
you feeling this final stretch?
I love it. You know, you're talking about 2 weeks to go in this thing. It seems like we've been sort of dreading the pace of this thing for so long.
Yeah.
And now suddenly I'm dreading the prospect that it might be over.
You are?
Somewhat. But I'm ready.
All right. Yeah. Well, we're ready for you. Let's get started. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton looking to build support in Florida again today, a day after early in-person voting began in the Sunshine State. This is an independent daily tracking survey billed as the nation's most